Hey, let's talk terrain, yo. Hey, Steve.
Hey,
what do most wargame tables are about, 90% made of?
Felt.
No, I was going to say terrain, but then what do most people spend the least amount of time on?
Terrain.
So tonight we've got a special guest. You might have heard him spoken about on either Rocky's or Chris Arnold's shows that they do. So let's cue him up here. All right, straight out of Minnesota. Crazy.
Hey.
For now.
We got Chris Clucky with us.
Hey, all. Hey, Jay.
You need like an applause button.
So, just full disclosure, Chris was my boss for when I first started.
And mine.
Yes, and then
One of mine,
he moved Then he moved far away, and but we stayed in contact. And he comes in for local cons and has helped me out with Wiley Wargame Weekend. And Chris does some fantastic terrain, so that's mostly why I wanted to bring him on tonight so we can talk about this. I'm going to show a little sizzle here, some of Chris's works, and then we'll get talking. Quite impressive, sir.
Damn it, that's American. That's American, man.
Yeah, that is.
It's
So my personal pet peeve is when I go to a convention or something like that, and I see some well-painted miniatures, and then they're just sitting on some felt or some horsehair or something like that, and I realize I always got a lot of time, but at the same time, you spend all this time and money painting these miniatures, but then you don't spend the same amount of time actually where all the action's happening. Like I said earlier, 90% of the table is the terrain, but a lot of people don't spend that much time on it. So I was just wondering what your sort of philosophy was when you're thinking about doing a table, because you're pretty focused on, unlike the rest of us, on a few specific periods that you like French and Indian War is what I featured, but I know you do more than that. So if you want to talk about, how you approach stuff, that would be cool.
Okay, so I have the same butterfly brain that every other wargamer has, and I have a stack of projects that are now all in boxes, ready to make the move back to Kansas City. That because I have basically been a workaholic my entire younger life, I haven't had time to get to them. So they're all stacked up on the runway, ready for a little love. But as you mentioned, the French and Indian War basically took over for just about everything else. So I got back into wargaming in the early 90s after getting out of art school and discovering DBA. I'm an ancients guy at heart. I'm a Republican Roman at heart. Punic Wars is probably my favorite time period, but I've never really found the miniatures in any scale that made me excited about building out all the armies. Now I did do a 15 millimeter Punic Carthaginian army, and I used that for DBA and DBM and DBMM a little bit.
And then later on, Commands and Colors.
Commands and Colors, yeah, which surprisingly has been a lot of fun, and I think is fairly realistic in terms of the historical results you get. So all that said, I was living in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, in the sort of mid-aughts, and after living in Minnesota for a while, I'd moved to Tulsa, and then we were doing a lot of wargaming in Tulsa, and we were doing a lot of DBA type stuff, doing some Crimson Skies, had a really good group going. And I had a chance to come back to Minnesota in 2007 on a work project. So I took a couple hours and slipped into the St. Paul area and went to the stores, which is maybe one of the greatest comic book and war game shops that I've ever been to. It's incredible. And I found a rule set that was fairly new there called This Very Ground. And I wasn't a skirmish gamer. I'd been interested in French and Indian War, but I wasn't sure how to approach it. And I just bought these rules. The reason that 2007 is kind of an interesting date is because I was actually on the I-35 bridge a couple hours before it fell.
Oh,
and it was all to get to the source and back. Yeah, it wasn't a close call. It was several hours. But that day is kind of etched in my memory now because of it. So so I just started playing around with the rules, and I was looking at hexes and board games because I started out as a board gamer. Hold the Line is a Revolutionary War and French and Indian War game that I was thinking about doing, basically converting it to hexes and miniatures like Command and Colors. And then I found the John Jenkins figures in 54, 60 millimeter scale, and I bought a handful, and that changed my whole approach.
That's all most people can afford of those.
Well, for a little while here, I had a little more money than sense. But it really hooked me. It really hooked me into the period. The sculpting is great. They're pre-painted, so I know that's cheating, but I do a lot of overpainting.
You do.
And
so you do a good job of taking the same pose and making it look like they're different guys. I will tell you that. And
actually, I've repainted whole units in completely different uniforms. So
are they metal?
Like I say, I know they're metal. Yep. So I know it's cheating, but it's allowed me to get a lot of metal on the table too. So the whole idea, the reason for this history and all this story is, while we're talking terrain, is I couldn't figure out how to do the French and the Indian War and make it look like mature woods. That was really the whole point. The whole point of the exercise was, okay, I'm just going to do a little skirmishing. I'm going to do a small table. I'm going to start playing around with it. And then I got hooked into the John Jenkins stuff. And then I got into the whole history of the conflict, all the different units, all the different uniforms, all the different First Nations. And I sort of fell in love with the whole period. So then it was, how do I do it and do it right?
Yeah.
And then it became, how do I do it right? How do I make it look good? And how do you make it playable? Because dioramas are really
got all these woods. How do I get my miniatures down in
dioramas are really cool, but how do you actually play on it? So, and with the Jenkins figures, they're top heavy. They're not 3 or 4 figures on a base. They're a 2.5 inch tall figure, and they fall over on a slope. So your table has to be flat, and even your slopes have to have flat areas that the figures can sit on. Then I wanted it to be geomorphic, so that I could build everything in squares and then build whatever battlefield I needed or wanted to, without having to build huge areas on the table and building it in squares so that it was all. You have to design it so that it's transportable because I travel with it. I go to show I've been to a few shows and traveled with it. So there was a whole lot of design considerations that we can talk about separately that came into play when I went the route that I did.
And I helped you set up a game once, and it is all very organized.
Well, I have to store it in an organized way. It has to be stored in a way that protects it while it's traveling. So it all goes in plastic bins with padding, and it has to be organized enough that you can find it when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you started, so most of your open terrain, what little there is, you've used some really nice like teddy bear fur type stuff,
Yeah,
but then you've gone in and then like modified it. But then the actual woods, let's talk about that for a second. Before we do that, we got some people came in. Of course, Not Jay came in. We've got a Solo Wargamer guy said hi. Ken Seidenbald. Seidenbald. There we go. Seidenblad. God. Says hello.
Reading is
oh, there's Murray. He's late as usual. And he said, hold the line is great. So hold on for a second here. I think we might have another. Yes, we. We've got another special guest here. We've got Not Jay, a.k.a. Chris Arnold, who is Chris Clucky's biggest fanboy. So I figured I had to have him on so he could get the vapors a little bit.
Jeez Louise.
How's it going?
Somebody needs to close the door. Good God.
So anyway,
I will,
if you mean special guest, you mean like short yellow bus special? Yeah, you got that right on the.
Yeah,
we got the window Tuesday special tonight, boys.
I will say, I've at Wiley War Games weekend and Recruits, I've seen Chris's game set up. I haven't played in it because I'm either wandering around or I'm running a game on my own. But it's pretty stunning. And you know what you said, Jay. You talked about walking around conventions earlier when we got started. Is like if you walk around a convention and you're setting up a crappy looking table, but you spend all your time on your figures to set up a crappy looking table. All they're going to see is the terrain. But it always blows my mind that the most beautiful tables I see at a convention don't have that many people, and that the people are going. I don't understand it. Are going to
Chris has a table that when you walk in, you're like, I want to play in that. I don't know what the hell that game is. I'm not even interested in French and Indian War, but damn it, I want to play that game. So
but I'm seeing people sit at tables that have, a building is an upside down drink carrier from McDonald's, and it's like, come on, man, come on.
And you could do that if you spend some time actually. I'm not saying you have to 3D print everything or you need to craft it. You're spending all this time on your miniatures.
Right. And put some heart into it.
Yeah. Mini Warmutt does a great job of taking trash and making amazing looking buildings out of it. So, I mean, it can be done. But most people don't.
So I actually think that after going to some conventions and talking to some people and seeing the people that I get playing at my games, I have this theory that really beautiful tables actually intimidate some people away from playing. Absolutely,
yeah. They're afraid of breaking something.
And I've always made sure that my stuff is got 3 coats of varnish on it. We're really careful on the table. I've only had one miniature broken in all the 20 some plus games that I've done. I didn't yell at the person that did it. It was totally an accident, but I still think that, and I've seen it. I still think that a really pretty table is intimidating to some. It's intimidating to some people, and they just don't.
I can see that.
They just don't want to get involved. I don't know what it's.
Is it like a pretty girl at a bar? So it's like a pretty girl at a bar that you don't want to go up to and talk to because she's just too good looking. You think you're like too low rank to go say hello.
Yeah, you're
not in class.
You're not in her class. Yep, could be. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and I guess I don't get that, but I mean, that's to me. If you're going to go to a war game, if you're going to go to a convention to play, it's like, why not play in like the best possible one that you can? So, but
Corey's right here.
So I'm going to show your little video again for the people who showed up late, and then hopefully you could talk about like how we talked about the French and Indian War being tough because it's all fought in the woods. So how you're able to make the woods war gameable. So I'm gonna show that real quick again just for everybody. So if you could see, there's all these trees, but the trees don't have tops to them. But you get that feeling that you're in the woods, but still being able to reach down and move the miniatures around. So I know you went through some evolution about how you built it.
Yeah. So
I've seen all the versions of it.
Yeah. So initially, so what I did is, I don't know where the idea came from originally, but the whole idea is at that scale, you're never going to see the tops of the trees. And even though I've had people, even though I've had people at conventions come to me and say, you should put a big green mat over the top of it for the trees. And then I'll say, well, then I can't play on it. So
yeah, exactly. Then I got to take it off. I got to take it off every time I want to get at the miniatures.
Yeah. So, but the whole idea was, it's all research based. So I started doing the research about what mature forests in New England looked like, and they were open. Mature forests were, the trees were very tall. There was a lot of room around them. The undergrowth didn't have a chance to grow up around them because they were shaded from the tops of all the trees.
Yeah.
So there was actually, unless you had some spots where trees would fall and the sunlight would come through, there was really a lot of open space around the trees in the woods themselves. So that led me to looking at the next thing, which was then flat space. So everything has to be flat or my figures are going to fall over. Okay. So then the idea was, how do I get those mature looking tree trunks? Because that's all I need is the tree. You could go out in your yard and start cutting branches apart, but I needed 8-inch lengths, and Michael's had birch tree limbs about 5 foot in length, which I'm not buying any longer because I found out that it's not environmentally sound to do that. But I did it before I knew it, so. I would buy these 5 foot lengths, and I'd cut them down to 8 inches a piece, make sure the sides are flat. And then what I was doing originally was drilling a hole in the bottom of them and then pushing a bolt up through the bottom of the cork, which was really labor intensive. And then it dawned on me one time that I should just use magnets because I can embed the magnets in the playing surface, and then I can put the metal washer that the tree trunk is actually attached to is magnetic in itself. So you put the magnets in the ground where you want them, and the tree stays where you want it to. That that's really the basis, besides the playing surface, of what makes the woods look the way they do. The playing surface, I settled on 12-inch cork squares. So just the kind that you do for boards. So you buy them at Michael's.
Yeah.
And dollars. Except I never bought one at full price. I was using the 50% off coupons that Michael's used to send all the time. So I would go once a week and buy a 4-pack and just stack them up until I was ready to make some terrain. And then I'd embed the magnets in them and put a little flock on them, and they were pretty much ready to go. The wood grain, the chipboard pattern in the cork blocks gives it a really woodsy forest floor look without a lot of extra work.
Yeah.
Because you can put
it looks like you get all that ditcherous.
Yeah. You can put a lot of, basically, yeah, you can put a lot of leaf litter down if you want, but then your figures are going to fall over because you need a flat surface. So that's really what drove everything.
But then around the bases, you went up and you built up with lichen, and then you cut little pieces of fern from larger plastic fern fronds. You kind of clip the end, you sort of stick those around the bases, and it gives the illusion of there's a lot more, but it's really, you're not really making the base any bigger, but it feels like there's all this kind of undergrowth, but you've still got all this flat surface to play.
Yeah. So then the other idea is, how do you know when you're in the woods and when you're not, or when your miniatures are in the woods and when they're not? And that's a key element in the French and Indian War: visibility, shooting ranges, all that. It's all got to do with terrain decides all that. And terrain is a really big aspect of how those battles.
Chris. Hold on, Chris. We're losing you. Well, we'll wait for Chris to come back. Hold on. Hold on.
So I came up based on.
Hold on, Chris. We lost you. You're going way in and out. Hold on. While we're doing that, we'll take some comments here. So,
Okay.
Nache showed up, so of course McMurray had to say, get the extra S on the tonight, I guess. And Todd said, well, batting 500, pretty awesome. What kind of games does Chris put on? We'll get to that in a second. And yeah, I may have found a way to play fistful of lead, horse and musket, bigger battles relatively easy. Got to build up on the wargaming account. Yep. And then, Chris is the 15 millimeter buyer. Yeah. So, Chris, you went out right when you were talking about the difference of defining where the woods are and where the woods aren't.
Okay, so the little bit of history really.
Of course, throw when you talk.
Everything. I'm a research guy, so I play lots of stuff. I play fantasy, science fiction too, but the historical side of it, if I'm doing historicals, I'm doing the research. And terrain was a huge part of how tactics developed in the French and Indian War. So you got to get your terrain kind of right. So the idea then is, how do you know when your miniatures are in the woods and when they're not? Well, I decided that the cork surface would always be wood. And then for all of the non-woods, I used the teddy bear fur or whatever else we're doing, rivers, roads, whatever else because you got to have all of it. So then to go to cork, from the edge line of the cork to whatever else you're doing, is pretty boring unless you do something dramatic. And for me, the drama was I came up with the idea of the tree line, which is basically 1.5 inches wide by 12-inch long section of tree limbs and undergrowth that gives the illusion that you're moving from non-woods into the woods or vice versa. It also gives you a really nice way to look out of the woods and look into the woods. If you're up against that area, then you can be seen in or out, and it makes the visibility issue a piece of cake too for the actual game, because playability is the key. If the terrain looks good but you can't play on it, it's worthless. And just like the rules need to be playable and fun.
Yeah, your edge of the woods are kind of like bocage in a way. People might be, but it's more limbs and more trees and less bush kind of a thing. But just so people can visualize what you're kind of talking about, you've got those around the edges to kind of define the edge really nicely. Like you said, you're at the edge and you know that you're right there and you can see into it versus seeing out of it. So there's no fight over, are you in the woods? Are you in the woods? What can you see? What you can't see, kind of a thing. So
plus, it gives you a very small transition from visually and actually playability wise. What would be the more rambly undergrowth part of the woods, which would be getting more sunlight and so more growth, and then into the mature woods, which is your more open space.
Yeah. So
it's
go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just going to say, like myself, I hate making terrain because I'm ADD. I got to get stuff done quick. How long, when you decided to do this time or this period of gaming, how long did it take you? I'm assuming you had trial and error to figure out what looked right and what didn't look right. How long did it take you to get to a point to where you're like, I'm ready to put on a game now? This looks good. Are you done making? And second, are you done making terrain for that? Or are you still like constantly? Are you adding stuff, adding to it? Like, or are you adding to it? Or it's like I'm done. I'm done with this period. I'm going to move on to something different.
I don't think I will ever be completely done with this period. There are other periods that I can definitely see myself kind of getting to a certain point and going, okay, I've built all the terrain I need to for it, or I've painted everything I need to paint for it. But there's always going to be something interesting that I haven't.
Yeah, like you read about a specific battle
for this
and
time.
You're like,
sure,
this battle had a redoubt on it, or this happened by a lake, and then you're like, well, shit, now I got to make that.
Yeah, and that's driven a lot of most of the games I put on have been based loosely on an historical engagement, and that has almost always pushed me to build something specifically for that particular game.
Yeah.
So
to me, I think that's a great point, because that's kind of how I am. When I decide I'm going to put on a game, that's what drives me to build the terrain for that game. Like, we were going to do that mech game for our crossover weekend, and I knew I wanted to have part of a city in it. So I did different. I went and found the files that I wanted, and I printed them and I painted them and stuff. But I might have never built those things if I hadn't decided to do that particular battle or that kind of setup kind of a deal. And I had messed with some sci-fi terrain, but then Steve started just cranking out the Star Wars crap, and I'm like, well, now
it's not crap.
It's not crap.
It's not crap, Jonathan. It's a way of life. It's a way of life.
Steve, you really do nice tables too. I've seen your stuff too, and your tables are really great.
Thanks.
Well, Steve buys some of it, and then I print it out and paint it. But that's just as good, because then it stays over at my house, and I got it, so I don't feel so bad about it. So.
And that is 100% true. I think that happens like once a week. That happens once a week. He'll send me a message about something. He's like, "Look what I found," or "Look what I found." And then I bought it. Send him the file. Print this out.
Yeah,
that's just the way it is. But it's like, I know people are like, probably a majority of people who are in the hobby, they're like, well, I don't have the money to do this, and I don't have the money to make stuff. And
then you're in the wrong hobby.
Well, I think you can.
It's time for other drinks.
I think you can, make something out of nothing. Just put some goddamn elbow grease into it. There's just so much half-ass shit out there.
I'm a strong believer in the littles, so I think you can do a lot with little pieces, and to me that gives you the feel for the period. So like, say French and Indian War, and you've got a little settlement. Well, just putting the well out there and the farm implements and the little, barrels and stuff like that, all of a sudden kind of brings to life and makes a whole little story. Like, well, now I know who lives there.
Especially in a skirmish environment where you're not using a lot of miniatures and it's really narrative driven. They add so much to the story. Those little things add so much to your story.
Yeah.
When Jay's painting them, he's talking like Bob Ross. Now I'm gonna make this little cabbage patch. I'm gonna put it right here next to the
farm implements.
So like you look at pictures of a real Western town, real period photographs, and there's crap lining the streets, like
historical research.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the stuff that people are selling on the streets, all the stuff that's been piled up at the general store, just the wagons backed up and all that, and that's the stuff that you miss when a lot of people put on a game, and that stuff actually isn't that expensive, and a lot of it's easy to make yourself, like putting horse troughs, putting the tie-ups for the horses. Those are simple things you can make out of balsa wood that are really easy to make. But I think add a little bit extra flavor. And it's also cover for a skirmish game. But even in like big battles, say, Napoleonic stuff like that, you could still have, next to your cannons having, little, the stuff where the caissons have been unloaded and stuff like that. And you make these little vignette pieces here and there. And all of a sudden it adds a whole level to it, the storytelling kind of element to it that I think is missing a lot of times. So to me,
I was going to go ahead, Jay. I was going to say, from a design point of view.
Go ahead.
Okay, so from a design point of view, one of the other things that was really important to me when I started building this terrain was reusability. So I tried to build everything, not building wise, but from the ground, rivers, streams, roads, even the woods to some degree. I tried to build with the idea that I could use this stuff for other periods and other scales. So it could work really well. So most of this stuff, not all the plant life is scalable, but everything else mostly can scale to be 28 millimeter, but I'm also dabbling in other periods in 54 millimeter too. So this terrain is going to be usable for a lot of different games and a lot of different periods, because I'm not just the French and Indian War guy. There are other things too. So that was so when I was designing it to be geomorphic, everything built on a 12-inch square. Here's the other things. I really didn't start just from scratch. And if somebody doesn't have a lot of ideas, not everybody went to art school, not everybody's not everybody has every idea on their own. I certainly don't. I started looking at the web, and I found JG Miniatures in the UK, and he's a terrain builder for the model soldier.
JG
Miniatures. John Gittins is his name. He's an artist, lives in the UK, and JG Miniatures is his website. And if you start looking at some of his stuff, you'll notice some of it is in my world too. So I started out with his terrain squares, but I didn't like the flocking, and I ended up with his teddy bear fur mats that he will build for you in custom sizes all the way up to 5 by 9 feet or larger sometimes. But he razor cuts them and airbrushes them, and they're beautiful. They look like pasture land. So it's not just like a teddy bear fur that somebody painted on. It's great. It's artistic. Now it's important to me that the ground look really like ground. So I started out with his terrain squares and his rivers and his grass mats, and I combine them in different ways so that you may or may not recognize them, but they started with him. So you don't necessarily have to start with a blank slate and design everything from scratch. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can adapt,
modify,
and make your in my case, make it your own because it's so different from how it started.
Yeah.
But without JG Miniatures, my stuff wouldn't look nearly as good.
Oh, hey, real quick, Hexy's got a question.
Yeah,
Okay.
I heard
And it's
Chris
just up on the
mention
screen now.
he started with Hex and Counter or board games. I want to know what Hex and Counter games before he fell down this rabbit hole.
How far back do you want to go? I still am a board gamer. I don't get the chance to play very much, but
Friends.
But hopefully that's going to change when I move. But how far back do you want to go? I'm an old Avalon Hill guy. So back in
go all the way back, baby. Where did it start?
back in my so where did it start? So actually, my dad and I built models together when I was a kid. He was really into World War II airplanes, and he collected German World War II militaria. So he had German helmets, he had Luftwaffe uniforms. He was really pretty seriously into it. And one of his collector friends, handed me 4 board games one day. I was probably, 11, 12 years old. There were 4 Avalon Hill games. It was D-Day, Stalingrad, Afrika Korps, Battle of the Bulge. And I played those games until I wore them out. So I only had 1 or 2 friends that would play with me back in my high school days, but grew up in a small town and war games isn't exactly the thing that everybody wants to do. But
that didn't get you any cheerleaders playing board games?
Nope, not a single one. Well, nope, not a single one.
Please, guys.
Hey, would you like to play a board game with me?
Yeah.
I'm starting the Hex Club.
So I was never that out about it, but yeah. So Afrika Korps I played a great deal. Never got into D-Day too much, but Battle of the Bulge is a great Avalon Hill game if you can get it. It's still super fun to play, and the Afrika Korps game was a lot of fun too. And to this day, World War II North Africa is still was one of my favorite periods that I'm doing in Micro Armor, and will eventually.
Yes, and you struggled finding the perfect. So one thing I would say about Chris is he's struggled finding 1, the perfect rules, and then 2, the perfect miniatures. Like I know you specifically modified some miniatures you bought, I think from War Games Foundry, some Republican Romans, because you didn't think that they looked right.
Well, they actually have I'm a Foundry guy too, so I've got a lot of 28 millimeter Foundry lead in the lead mountain, but I really had and specific sculptors like Cobblestone who did a lot of the World of the Greeks thing stuff for them, also did their Caesarian Romans. So there was an older range of Republican Romans that weren't bad, but once the scale kind of moved to 28 millimeter versus 25 millimeter, they didn't look right with anything else.
Yeah.
So I eventually traded them off, and I got the Caesarian Romans, and they were really good, except I needed to put. Some of them needed breastplates, and then they had to have the feathers on the helmet, and they needed a greave on the left leg. So there were sculptural changes that had to be made, and to get the ones that I really wanted. So I did that. I never got him on the playing table. There just hasn't been time. So
Kid said advanced squad leader, yes, of course. And then Charles says, I've got Africa Corps on my table right now.
great. So the thing about
Right
Africa Corps for me is that there's really only sort of two tactics that you do that the Germans can succeed in, and you do them kind of over and over again, and it's kind of the luck of the dice as to how far you're gonna get with them. So for me, Africa Corps was not as playable as something like Battle of the Bulge or Stalingrad. Stalingrad is just epic. I mean, you're fighting across the whole Russian front in a couple hours, and very playable, and you're exhausted at the end of it because you literally moved across the whole
Smoke a cigarette when you're done.
back in a couple hours. Yeah, I mean, if you can get your mindset into what you're actually doing, if you look at them as paper counters and play them that way, you're losing all the fun, to me, of the history that you're really reproducing when you're playing a board game of such epic. It's an epic scale, the whole Russian front.
Well, and then speaking of Africa Corps, if you're going to model that on the tabletop and play big scale, you don't have to worry about terrain too much.
Yeah,
so it's almost like a sea battle.
Yeah,
because especially after you gave me that book on the sort of memoirs of that one British tank commander.
Brazen Chariot. Brazen Chariots was a book written in the early 60s by a guy who was a journalist and also a tank commander in the British Army. It is a fantastic book.
It is.
It's really short, but it is a great.
They wander around through most of it, and most of the battles are shit that they stumbled into, or they're just like, oh crap, we ended up at the coast, because they're navigating old school. There's parts where they could see tanks rolling in on them, and they're trying to cook their tea on the engine.
Yeah,
like, it's almost ready. All right, get out of here. And then they take off. Right?
Whose tanks are they? Sometimes you can't even tell. The thing about the desert that I found so interesting in reading books like that is that you think of it as this big flat space, but it's not. It's
and how do you model that, especially at a large scale when you're using micro armor? How do you model all those little folds and waddies and all that kind of stuff that you could hide into? For me, I also like Africa Corps growing up watching Rat Patrol and stuff, which I know is bullshit, but
it was fun.
I always wanted to do the skirmish scale, like a little battle around a water hole or a small village or something like that, kind of a thing, like long range desert group versus some kind of force like that. But the other part of it was he talked about how they'd just be sitting there and some like German or Italian soldiers would just come up and surrender to them, and they're like, all right, get on the back of the tank. And then about 20 minutes later, he's like, I should probably get the guns off of them.
God.
Yeah, it's a great book.
What
Charles says, I'm using step variant counters for his, he said. But here's the thing for Hexy, for hex to hex. So Chris ran a couple of times the recruits, did commands and colors, but he actually used strips of figures, your old DVA size miniatures, and instead of having the classic little wooden block that you turn for your losses, you actually had like 4 stands for the infantry and 3 for the cavalry, and you would actually pull the actual miniatures, which is cool in a way. And then also because of the way that DVA is set up with like the 2 figures for the lights and the 3s for the auxilia and the 4 for the legionnaires, it was also visually, you could look at it and see that you were fighting heavies or mediums or lights and stuff like that.
It's the perfect marriage, because commanding
the hexes allow you to know exactly the range. There's no fight over the range. You know exactly what terrain you're in. There's no fight over, what are they in the woods or are they out of the woods? No, you're in a woods hex, so I know that you're in the woods. So yeah, like you said, it's a marriage of the two that actually comes out pretty perfect. And that's why I like To the Strongest, that same way. It's a miniatures game, but it's on squares, and you're fighting square to square, so you actually save a lot of time because you've taken the measurement system out of it. Nobody's whipping out taking the time to. I know it doesn't seem like much taking the time to pull out the tape measure, but when you take all that tape measure out of there, you end up saving a half an hour, 45 minutes off of the game.
And arguments over who got moved where. So yeah, it's not lost on me that my 12-inch squares also have 4-inch squares on them.
Yeah.
So they could be very, very easily used for To the Strongest too.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's also a similar sort of mechanic too, where you're rolling X amount of dice and all that kind of stuff. So Hexy found that very interesting, that you could have a marriage of wargaming and board gaming at the same time.
And again, that's really how my whole French and Indian War thing started out. As I was going to be, I was playing with Hold the Line, which is a pretty fun board game. Does the job pretty nicely, and I built like 150 core hexes that I started playing with, and then I found This Very Ground, and I just fell in love with that rule set. I didn't want to play hexes anymore after that. I wanted to model the actual terrain and use This Very Ground. So,
yeah, McMurray says Rommel is like that. It's a great game. I never played Rommel, but
I've not played it. I own it, and I've read it. I have not played it, and I know it's convertible to hexes. It's on squares, and it's convertible to hexes as well.
And I'm a big Sam Mustafa, that's how you say it, fan. We play several of his games. That's right, you heard it here. We don't always play Fistful of Lead games.
It's true.
And we're gonna have an upcoming show about playing other games.
Dun dun dun.
So, yeah.
Well, I think the very first game that I played on Chris Clucky table was not Fistful of Lead.
No, you were probably playing
This Very Ground.
Yeah.
This Very Ground, because up until I started using muskets and Mohawks 3 years ago, I was just doing This Very Ground, and then I was helping Jay out with some. We did some games of Fistful of Lead too, but.
So I would like to say though, even when you were playing Commands and Colors, which is hex based, you still had the cool modular hexes that showed hills, and it showed, it wasn't just, we weren't just playing on a flat, we weren't playing a board game with miniatures. It actually had some terrain folds and, hills and mountains and stuff like that, and had woods and all that kind of stuff. So you got the simplicity of movement and mechanics of a board game, but you still got the feel of terrain. So that's what we go back to the original sort of intro of, for me, again, with the caveat, 3 of us in this little discussion here all went to art school and have that kind of background. I want my table to look like the paintings that I've seen of battles and stuff like that. To me, if I'm going to spend all this time painting these little lead bastards and plastic bastards and all that kind of stuff, I want them to feel like they're in the environment that they're in. I should be able to take a picture of the battle, and I should feel like, oh, look, I got a snapshot of, it looks like one of those paintings and stuff like that. That's me. I know people don't have the time commitment, but you're already committing to the time of painting and stuff too.
Right.
So,
absolutely.
You know, if you're going to
Yeah,
go,
you know-
go in, it's like if it's any other hobby. Why are you in the hobby if
If
you're
you're going to half-ass it.
if you're going to half-ass it? If you're going to collect coins, you're only going to collect a couple of them and just be like, I'm done. Kind of. I don't know. It's always evolving for me.
The
Well, I
thing
think
is,
you can do with whatever you have and whatever you can afford. So
Sure.
there's that aspect of it.
Well, to Chris's other Chris, not Jay, his point, Mini Warmut has done. He has a whole thing just on making terrain from trash or making terrain from other stuff, and it's totally doable. You can do it on the cheap and make it look good too. Not everybody has a printer, but then I throw in but then you can also make the little stuff that adds to the whole flavor of the thing too. So
it's storytelling.
Yeah.
And that's it. So going back to the whole idea of I don't want my terrain or the rules that I'm playing to pull me out of the story that's being told.
Yeah.
I don't like when, and I know this isn't about rules, it's about terrain. But the two pet peeves are terrain that doesn't feel like where you think you should be, and then rules that have a mechanic that pop you out of whatever narrative you're trying to get into.
Yeah, and I'm throwing in the board game aspect just for a second because Charles said one day I'm going to use my GHQ Micro Armor with my Avalon Hilton Brook. I am always looking for a board game I can use for a campaign that I can then fight out the battles on the tabletop.
Oh, funny you should say that.
And funny, I should say that because I know a certain someone who has done that.
So, Bayonets and Tomahawks is a game that just came out from GMT. I love GMT games. Their games are fantastic. The best French and Indian War board game ever is Wilderness Wars. It's probably 15 or plus years old now. It's also GMT. It is a fantastic board game. And it gives you the full flavor. It's card driven, gives you the full flavor of the French and Indian War, all the political aspects of it, all the different units. It's great. But a new game came out called Bayonets and Tomahawks, just from GMT Games, and the original.
Not to be confused with the war game that Muskets and Tomahawks just made a new one called Bayonets.
Yeah. So Bayonets and Tomahawks is actually is designed by a French-Canadian, French and Indian War reenactor who also got help from the original designer of Wilderness Wars. And I communicated with him a couple times during the development process just to ask some questions because I was looking for, I was wanting to understand what scale he was using for his counters. So his counters are actually, they blend perfectly with the scale that I wanted to represent. So basically my battalions are 2 units of 10, and my light troops are six figures strong. And his counters are actually 2 battalions in a metropolitan brigade and 300 to 500 soldiers in a light counter. So basically, his counters go 1-to-1 directly with the way I'm basing my miniatures now. So it is like the perfect marriage of the board game becomes the way you fight the miniature battles on the tabletop.
Yes.
So, and just another little note.
Hey, when you move back, we're going to do that.
We are going to do that. And if you look at the counters that he used, the artwork on the counters is based on some of the John Jenkins miniature sculpts.
Wow.
So it's really just like this perfect marriage of visual aesthetics and scalability that I'm really excited about getting to get that on the tabletop at some point. And it's a pretty simple game too.
And then when you move here, then we can actually play that campaign out.
Yeah.
So Rocky's here. Matt says, "Sup, fellas," and
Sup.
then Hex to Hex says, "Your miniature painting and terrain building is like my separating counters, clipping counters, and setting up a game." Yes, but yours is probably a hell of a lot easier. Oh, look, Matt and Hex, you're having a love fest here. Yeah.
Earlier, Solo RPG guy asked about Fistful of Fantasy. Still on track for release next month.
Yeah, I was ignoring him, so I wouldn't have to answer.
I thought you were.
I just sent second book off to editor. I just sent third book off to editor. Second's at the printer, and then I started laying out the hardback today. So there we go. Hey, Steve, I think we're getting to we're almost at the hour mark. I think I hear something.
Are we? Hold on. Let me check. Let me check. There's some technical difficulties here.
Smooth.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Steve, you got me all choked up in anticipation.
Yeah, I hear.
Wait a minute.
Uh-oh.
What's happening here? Nope, that's wait.
Informal.
There we go.
Oh, no.
There we go.
The mailbag.
We're gonna have to get building services to fix the mailbag danger siren.
Yeah.
Holy shit. We've got mail out the wazoo.
So what came in the mail?
All right, are you ready, Baron? These are some good ones. These are actual mail from actual Fistful of Lead fans, former maybe fans, but
yeah,
actual letters nonetheless. All right. Number one, Baron, I have a question about the fantasy release. Why can't you release the PDFs ahead of the printed books? Why the wait? Sincerely, Impatient in Indianapolis.
I thought that was going to say impatient in Arizona.
Yeah.
I thought about it. No. Well, I ask you, if you were patiently waiting for your printed book, how would you feel if you knew people had already got their PDFs and were out there playing without, you being able to play yourself? So that's my answer.
Not too good. Not too good.
I'm going to wait, and it's all going to go out at the same time. Same way with the hardback. It'll all come out at once.
That's the best way to do it, to be honest.
Well, and I usually put out
for a last-minute edit, too, that way.
Yeah, and I usually put out a book every quarter, but I'm essentially writing 4 books at once. So we're not putting them out every quarter. We're just going to have it's all going to happen. So
I've seen it. It's not like a George R.R. Martin Game of Thrones final books bullshit. It's coming. I've seen it.
All right, what's our next letter, Steve?
All right, I got to do a voice for this one. Dear Wiley Games, I have most of your books. My question is, can I mix the books? Can I use werewolves versus cowboys or mutants in outer space? Yours truly, Clueless in Cleveland.
My family's from Cleveland.
That could be Clueless from any damn where.
Yeah, Clueless from anything.
So I'll let Doc J answer this one.
The answer is.
Oh, you got a siren too? Oh.
This is how close I have all of them to me. Literally, I've got a brand new desk.
Right,
I've
the
got
big
a
dramatic
hutch.
buildup.
Right there. Right there is the slot for Wiley Games. All of these books can be cross-used. If you want to do Horse and Musket versus Space Mutants and Mexican Vampires, do it.
It's easy.
Yeah, it's
We just did. Go look at the Wiley Games videos. We just did Horse and Musket mixed with Galactic Heroes.
Yeah.
We did a big that crossed all the streams. We did Masters of the Universe.
It's and I'll be the first to admit I am one of the number one fanboys for Fistful of Lead.
Yeah.
Anybody that's watched any show that I've been on, whether it's been Rocky's War Room or my show or whatever, I can talk hours about this game. You can literally play any game with any model in your house. Doesn't matter.
Any model.
Battleships, spaceships, Star Wars figures. We're going to have a big Star Wars game coming up on the 21st. It's going to be a blast. Yeah. So if you want to play, the movie Cowboys versus Aliens,
Easy.
do it. You want to play John Carter of Mars. John Carter of Mars.
And just for the record, not Jay is not paid for this.
No, not at all. No. Anyway, yeah, a perfect example of crossing, in my opinion, the Galactic Heroes and Wasteland Warriors would be something like John Carter from Mars. It's a perfect game for Fistful of Lead.
And we're going to do it at some point.
Yeah, I've seen John Carter of Mars models out there.
Oh, I've got some, and we're going to do it at some point.
Well, you live in the Kansas City area now. I don't have to work on Saturdays. We need to make this happen.
We will make it happen. Yeah.
Definitely.
So the answer is yes, you can. The answer is yes.
The answer is
mix it up.
Mix it up.
I mean,
New Mexican vampires as well. Yes.
There you go. I'm actually working on a bigger battle.
I have the same one. Well, I got mine first, so there.
I'm working on bigger battles for Arab Israeli 1973 using Pico armor 3mm. So you literally can do anything with the rules.
We talked about, Jay and I were talking about upcoming ideas for games, and I've got some Chinese vampires. Yeah, some Chinese vampires, and Jay had an idea of having them in the Old West, and he's got several caskets. And the casket, what was the deal about the dirt and the caskets that we had talked about a while back? Is like the object of the game was to.
Yeah, we have a scenario that's already out there called the Marshall versus the Fanged Foreigner, and it's all about you're trying to. There's several caskets around the town that you're trying to destroy because a vampire is to sleep in his native soil to survive. So you're trying to get them all destroyed by sunrise, so that he has nowhere to go, and then you can finally fight him. That kind of thing. So anyway, which will feature my cowboy town.
Any shitty drive-in movie from like the 70s is perfect for Fistful.
Well, I'm going to do a whole game that's dedicated to 80s rock albums, like hard rock albums. So I found, I just been researching these like dudes in leather and dragons and spikes and
dudes in leather. Are you researching 80s rock movies?
That was my question too. A little too much information there.
I got a lot of pictures of guys in leather.
Well, that's what I'm. So when my wife looks over my shoulder when I'm on the computer, that's what I tell her I'm doing.
I'm doing gladiator movies. Mad Max.
So you can kill the vampire with the crescent. There's a whole isn't there a Monty Python sketch about that where the vampire's Jewish and he can't He doesn't
Probably
feel.
so.
Speaking of which, there's a great. If you missed it we'll get off topic for just a second because we're past the hour, so we can be a little off topic. There's a great Dracula movie that was made for Netflix that came out last year or something. It was like a 4-parter, and it was a modern take on Dracula. And at the end, it was a British.
Oh yeah.
And at the end of it, Dracula is like
Spoilers.
spoilers, but he's hissing at the cross or whatever, and the chick that's been hunting him is like, "Why does this bother you? What is it that innately makes you fear churches and all this kind of stuff?" And they basically come out to the fact that a vampire, you are what you eat, and you take on a little bit of the essence of the person every time you drain him. And he spent hundreds of years draining these superstitious gypsies and peasants and stuff, and he's taken on their sort of superstitions and crap like that. And then he realizes that, spoiler at the end, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm not really. I guess I'm really not scared of that stuff." He kind of comes out of it like that. None of that stuff bothers him by the end of it. So anyway, yes, and Matt points out you can do dinosaurs, yes, especially Napoleonics riding dinosaurs. All right,
You got that right.
Yeah. So to get back on topic just a little bit about terrain and stuff like that, what are some, for beginners or people who are, because the hobby can be very intimidating just because of, it's not like board games where you can just go buy a box and you're ready to go, or a hex encounter game, or a card game, or something like that. There's a reason why we are such a small niche out of the whole tabletop gaming hobby, is because it's a lot to get into.
Besides our personalities.
Well, yeah, that too. We're all dicks. Some of us more than others. But
You're not wrong.
you're not wrong. But there is it is intimidating to jump into it right away because it's not just a monetary investment. Although with our games, it is pretty cheap to get into. You only need like 10 figures and a 3x3 area.
And $7 for the PDF.
$7 for the PDF.
Well,
However,
and it's like, what you don't.
So from the three of you, while I go take a break here to relight my cigar, do you have any advice for people who want to get involved into it?
Into gaming itself?
Into wargaming. Like if you...
Yeah. I was going to be, and I'm not anti-game. I'm not anti-Games Workshop, but it's like, if, like, for instance, my nephew, if he goes to a gaming store and they've got one whole half of the wall, like Games Workshop stuff, you're looking at things that are like, and it's like, oh, I want to start and puts together a kit of figures. You're looking at, like, there's some things that are like 6 figures for miniatures to build for like $60 or something. And that, I think, you just look at it and go, holy shit, I'm not doing this. Now you could go back further into the store and look at like Bones miniatures where you can get those plastic figures for decent and paint those up. But I think, most game shops, at least ones that I've been to, they put the expensive shit front and center. And I think if you're new to the hobby, it becomes a little bit overwhelming, and you look at the price tag on stuff and go, no, this is too much for me. And I'm gonna stick with $7 at the time.
About $50.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a cheap one now.
But I mean, it's and I barely have any Games Workshop stuff at all. It's for me, it's just too expensive, and I just think that's
I think that it's interesting because what I've seen lately is just Games Workshop. Just for a second, most of I'll say kids, because I feel like everybody I talk to is a kid now. So, but most of the kids sort of start out with Games Workshop or something very similar, and then they branch out later, hopefully after finding some like-minded individuals in order to grow that part of the hobby. So we all start out as fantasy gamers. I mean, I did. Now I had this historical introduction early, which colored everything colored all my sort of gaming after that. But I still, I was a big chivalry and sorcery fan. I never played the RPG, but I had the book and I read it and read it and read it. And I was into that, when Chainmail came out, the Gary Gygax big battle scale rules. I never played that either, but that's when I sort of figured out about miniature wargaming. Was like you don't have to just do one or two figures; you can do whole armies, and that side of it always appealed to me more. But I think it's really important to sort of understand what it is you're getting into, what kind of games you're actually going to play. So going to tabletop, going to places where you can see people playing and get an understanding of the games, and then start small. I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. You don't start with a mega army. You start with Fistful of Lead, $7 for the PDF, and if you're buying both sides, 12 or 15 figures, and you're good to go.
Yeah, you start out with skirmish, and then you can build up to a large skirmish game, and then you can build up your armies, and by then you've hopefully figured out, yes, I like this period of this genre. And I mean, the one thing that GW has done good has been when they started kill teams, so that you can just play with a small amount, and if you like it, well, then you can buy another one, and you can and then you could grow it into a whole 40K army. Ryan pointed out that Necromunda's box set is $250. Yeah, but you could get you could build a Necromunda army or Necromunda game with less. You don't have to buy that whole big thing. John Longshore said my only issue is finding anyone interested in miniatures. My local game shops are all card and Euro centered. I will pray for
that's a huge point. So I've moved up to Minnesota twice. And the first time I moved up here, it was a really vibrant gaming community. It's when I got into DBA and DDM and Hordes of the Things and different scales and fantasy and historical. We had a great bunch of guys up here, and it worked out really well. When I moved up the second time, I didn't find as much that I wanted to play. So here's the other thing: is now the hobby has become so fragmented. In the olden days, in the ancients, there was 2 sets of rules. There was 2 Napoleonics. There was 10 different periods in games you could play. Now there are 10 different rule sets for each 10 years of a period. It's so try and find what you like.
And find somebody to play with you that wants to play that one.
And I'm super opinionated about what I play. I don't want to play games that suck. I don't have time. So now the idea is I want to play what I want to play, and I want to play with the people I want to play with. And it gets narrower and narrower and narrower unless you're willing to just show up and play anything. And while I've done that, I find that I don't want to do that as much anymore. I'll try something.
Yeah.
But once I've tried it, I know pretty quickly whether I'm going to want to play it again.
Yeah.
And if I don't, and all the other guys do, I'm out.
Right.
Yeah. Ken pointed out that Gaslands is a good intro because Matchbox cars are really cheap. And Matt, yes, thank you for the plug. While the game's a perfect start with, they are. John Longshore, as for minis games, I have an entire attic filled to the beat. Fortunately, one thing that COVID has done is you can play on the cheap. If you got a laptop and a $20 camera, you can play. I did lots of remote games before we were able to get back together again. We may have to go back to that. Who knows? Matt has all the Warcry stuff, and he'll be using it to play Slow Lead with. And
I did this. I bought the same.
And then,
That's-
Matt bought Hate because of you, Steve.
It's
Which
the
will be
figures are
playing.
the figures for Hate. I have yet to play Hate. I probably won't, but I ended up buying that solely on the miniatures. And what I'll end up doing is painting them and then using Wasteland Warriors for it.
And I own quite
Yeah.
a bit of Games Workshop stuff, but I've got them based for Hordes of the Things. I played that
Yeah.
instead.
Yeah, and Ken pointed out that paper minis, you can use those too. And we have to do play testing and stuff. It hurts deep inside when I play with them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you can do it. And like Thomas's Wooden War stuff, which is like a step up from Thomas Foss's Wooden War stuff, which is a step up from, of course, from the paint from the paper miniatures, but also fun to paint, and it gives you that sort of feel to it too. And then, we talked about getting into it and getting terrain, but like we said, if you start out with a skirmish level, playing on like a 2x2 or 3x3, then you can start the same way with terrain. You could start out with just a few pieces and sort of expand as your army expands to go with it. You can add more and more stuff to it as you go.
I got into my first thing was when I started working with you guys and you all were playing Blood Bowl.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, this is cool. And you're like, all you have to do is buy a team. So I picked a team, and that was the first thing. That was the first stuff I painted. And then we went to the original Necromunda.
Yeah.
And I bought
the cardboard stuff, and then we started going to the hardware store and buying pieces of PVC and painting them up all rusty and building our own platform and stuff like that. So to me, I think terrain can be just like getting into the hobby too, where you're starting out small and adding pieces.
And the other thing is now there's so much good pre-made terrain you can buy. If you start small and just buy 2 or 3 pieces, you're
right.
You're there, really.
Right. And especially if it's pieces that you're buying that when you're buying them, I can use this for this game, I can use this for this game, I can use it for this game. Stretch it out a little bit.
If you're sticking with historicals and you're doing Americana kind of stuff, the barn that you or the house you buy or build, you can use that for French and Indian War. You can use it for American Revolution. You can use it for ACW. And if it's a barn or something like that, hell, you can use it for all the way up to modern times, So.
And all of the woods and not the buildings, but everything else that I've been building terrain wise is also going to be used for my 15 millimeter Mexican Conquest project, which is coming up next.
Oh, but woods and jungle you can use for so many different periods, and as periods you can use it for a jungle world for sci-fi and stuff like that. So 90% of my stuff is reusable for other periods or other things. So Ryan asks, have you used any of your rule sets for Age of Sail? Oh, God damn it. I have a lot of Pirates of the Spanish Main that I could use. Well, I know I personally hate Age of Sail just because unless you're going to do like some cool pirate boarding action, to me, it's just like you're just playing on the blue, and I know there are tactics to it, but it's like watching NASCAR. I know there's tactics to it, but it just bores the crap out of me. I know that Matt is working on converting the Starfighter rules, and there he is, to Age of Sail stuff. I also just don't like painting ships and stuff either, because I know I would get into the research and I'd want to put the rigging and all that kind of crap on it. I do love Man of War though. So, but that's because it's fantasy and you've got weird stuff. You've got, Skaven fleets and orc fleets, and they all do different things rather than just, I've got this kind of ship and it has this many guns on it and all that kind of stuff. It's not for me.
Was it Was it you? Who has all the when we played Man of War? Who brought all the stuff? Was it you? Was it your stuff? I can't remember.
Well,
who
Kelly
has
painted up a bunch
anymore.
too. Kelly Green painted up a bunch, which is all mine, which is great because when people get tired of it, they just give it to me and it sits here.
I've got some of that old stuff too. I got the Elven and Dwarf fleets.
Yep.
Of Man of War.
Yeah, the old school.
Yeah, that stuff's great.
It is.
Is that the
yet again, another game that they made that was perfect, and then they just walked away from it. You know, they did it with Blood Bowl. They did it with the 10mm.
War Master.
Yeah, War Master. You know, like War Master, Blood Bowl, Man of War, 3 great games that they just went, no, we're done now. We're not going to do that stuff anymore.
Yeah, that's. Is that the game that we played? Was it Man of War, or was it something else that Scott Lindsay kept running all his ships onto land?
No, that was
the dwarves had this.
We used I think the Chaos had the shark subs.
Chaos did.
Yeah, I did. Well, what you're talking about, Steve, is we used the Dystopian War ships.
Oh, that's right.
But other great miniatures, but crappy rule set.
Yeah.
And we just played. We played full thrust with it.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did.
Full thrust, another great game. So, Beth is
What happened to Not? Where did Not Jay go?
He had to step away. So he probably had a coughing fit coming on. So, all right, we're probably going to cut out at 8:30. So if anybody's got any questions about terrain building and or
something for Chris. Hopefully not about fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, no more
Tell me
questions.
about the fantasy room.
He's working on it. It's coming.
I can't wait for you to show up at KC.
Show up where?
Yeah.
KC start coming out on Thursdays.
Oh yeah.
Even if you can't come out on Thursdays, come over on Thursdays and game with us, and then you know, we're also been playing this D&D campaign every other week, and you could jump in for that.
Okay.
Which we
Solo
started.
RPG guy asked. Solo RPG guy asked, which do you prefer, crafting your own terrain or 3D printing it? 3D printing it. I'm working on my London for.
Now, see, I go the other way on that one because of what I'm doing right now with the French Indian War stuff. So it's all basically it's all handcrafted pretty much. Buildings and
I'm
stuff.
I'm doing a Victorian town, and I'm like, I don't want to build all that. I don't want to put all the bricks on and do all that crap. So I'm printing it.
Yeah.
So
sure. Yeah, I mean, if you're building a building, then absolutely 3D printing is the way to go.
Yeah,
Who's the dude that
trees, natural stuff? Yeah, it's easier. Yeah. I find it's better to do what you're doing.
Jay, who's the buddy of yours in England that makes stuff, and anytime you show him something that you grew and painted, he always writes back. His compliment is grow lines.
Yeah. Well, for buildings, I don't see him as much, and you don't really see him when you get really close to him. That's James, the Oshira Model Terrain, who is also my distributor in the UK. So if you're in Europe and want to buy some of our stuff and want printed books, you can buy them from him. But he also has a background in architectural model building, and that's his true love is building all that stuff. And he does cast a lot of it after he's made it, and you can buy them already pre-cast and then paint them yourself. And he's also has a huge love of Japanese architecture and culture. So his stuff is going to be accurate.
Yep.
And so I don't begrudge him when he says I can see model lines and stuff, because one, it's cutting into his business, of course. But you're also getting when you pay for it. So when you buy some from him, it's going to be perfect. So. And
beautiful.
Leviathan steampunk with starships. There you go. That goes back to when I got to play Leviathan. Chris, didn't you buy some Leviathan ships because you were going to use them for Barsoom?
I did, yeah, because I was going to convert them to be Barsoomian ships. So yeah, never played the game, but it's got some.
I played it for 15 minutes at Gen Con until they kicked me off because someone had paid for that slot and showed up 15 minutes late. So I got to play it. There was a lot of dice.
Yeah,
not
it's got some cool mechanics.
Yeah, it's much more single ship versus single ship, wear each other down kind of stuff, and which is cool. But there wasn't a whole lot of maneuvering to it. You know what I mean? It was a lot more broadside kind of stuff to it, which is what usually turns me off about Age of Sail kind of stuff. Yes, insert random fantasy question so I can ignore you. Yep. That's what I do. You'll get it. It's coming. So
Robin
right,
hits him. He's crying.
Yeah. Oh, believe me, that the whole writing the fantasy series is probably what sent me to the hospital a couple of months ago. Not the drinking and smoking, because I was all clear to that. So the only thing the doctors could figure out was wrong with me was the stress. So, look, Ryan's going to come out on Thursday, but he's not going to play. So what's the point?
He likes to watch.
That's what I heard about him. So, all right, guys, we're gonna end the broadcast for you guys. We're gonna stick around and make fun of all of you after the broadcast is over. But everybody that tuned in, we're gonna try to do this again next month, and we'll have another topic for you. I think it's probably going to be playing other games besides Fistful Lit. I don't know why you would, but we do play it.
Yes.
We do play it. So.
And I'm sure we'll have more mailbag.
We will have more mailbag. So, Chris, thanks for coming by and talking about
thanks a ton, Chris.
everything you're working on. And
appreciate it.
We will see you next month.